Hello everybody, this week on the channel we have a quartet of performance Renaults, and we are starting with this, a 1987 5 GT Turbo. Booyakasha! It's funny, isn't it, what time can do to the image of a car. These days, when anybody mentions the Renault 5 GT Turbo, it's talked about with misty eyes and rose-tinted spectacles. And if somebody happens to have one, there's a lot of oohs and ahs and can I see it? At least a couple of people that I know do own them, and they are treated genuinely like a collector's piece. Yet, 2 short decades ago, and the 5 GT Turbo was so associated with the less desirable culture that it was the very choice of transport for one of our nation's heroes, Ali G. I can tell you that the Renault 5 GT Turbo is slower than an Audi TT. That is true. What else can I tell you about the 5 GT Turbo? Well, if you want to know numbers, here they are. It's an interesting little car, this. It's a 1987, which means it's the Phase 2. They're very easy to spot, the Phase 2s, because they have a totally different front-end treatment. If you want to be able to spot one in a few seconds, look at the Renault badge. If it's in the middle, it's a Phase 1. If it's off to the side, it's a Phase 2. I think it's actually a pretty good-looking car. It's unashamedly 1980s and looks resplendent in this lovely shade of blue. Don't know what it's called, but I'm driving an awful lot of cars in the next few days, so I haven't done too much research on any of them. I'm more interested in what the reality of driving them is compared to the expectations that people may have. When it comes to the 5 GT Turbo, I don't really have any expectations because it's never really been a car that's actually interested me all that much. Maybe I'm just a couple of years too old to have any particular fondness for it. When I did my research, I found out a few surprising things. The second generation Renault 5, or the Super Sank, was quite a different affair to the earlier version. You see, the earlier ones actually had a longitudinally mounted engine and a pretty old suspension setup, whereas the second version went for what we'd now consider a pretty standard transverse layout with McPherson struts up the front. It's quite a bit lower than the regular Renault 5, about 38mm at the front. That's huge. Rear suspension, of course, is different, and a whole heap of things were changed on this car over the ordinary one. Back in the day, it made a respectable 120 horsepower, at least in Phase 2, guys, thanks to a few little changes in the engine and, most importantly, water cooling on the turbo. That meant it revs about 500 RPM higher, going to about 6,000 RPM in this particular car. And this car is in lovely condition. It's one of many cars that's been lent to us by our new best friend, Ben. I'll put the link to his Instagram on the display now and in the description too, so you can see more of what he's got. We are featuring quite a few cars from his collection this month. There's a lot that's actually very old-fashioned about the 5 GT. Although that 120 horsepower was triple what the base TC of the time put out, obviously it's not amazing by modern standards. However, it did weigh only 850 kilos. What did surprise me during my research was the fact that this 1.4 litre Cleon engine is a pushrod. That's right, it's an overhead valve engine. I mean, people have been doing fancy twin cam stuff for 15, 20 years before this was made. This was really, really old-fashioned. However, even though it's still running carbs and everything else, it is actually very nice, very easy to drive like a normal car. It's absolutely 80s-tastic in here, but these seats are brilliant, extremely comfortable and very supportive. They've got a lot more sculpting in the sides than you realise. They really do hug you. This wheel is a little larger than you're used to, but the fact is you're actually probably a bit closer to it than you used to as well. But it's really nice to hold and has a proper classic look about it. Of course, there's no power steering, and that steering is nice and direct. The 5-speed gearbox is also a bit of a surprise because historically never really got on with French gearboxes all that well. It's not a particularly long throw, nor is it especially short. What is quite funny is the shape of the gear knob down here. Looks like they started with a regular sort of cylindrical one, and then somebody accidentally sliced a bit off the prototype and said, yes, it's what I want it to look like, it's fine. Five-speed, I guess, is actually not that bad for 1987 either, and to drive normally, the car is decent. And that's important to note, because I have driven a lot of old school performance cars where you really do know that they are a performance car. They don't enjoy being driven at low speeds. The 5GT Turbo though, no such complaints, but you'll want to know what it goes like. So let's get it on the open road and let's see what the turbo can do. And it wants to rev. The turbo comes in so smoothly you barely even notice it, if I'm honest. This is quite unusual. It's got a bit of poke. I couldn't tell you exactly how fast I'm going because the speedo is broken. So there's that. It's still got some real, genuine Frenchness in it, I can say. But it is beautiful to steer. I mean, really, properly nice. Let's get it from a bit lower speed and see what she's like. I was surprised. I was expecting it to be really sort of old school, wild, boosty, but it just isn't. You've got decent linear power. I mean, I wouldn't know that this was turbocharged at all. Of course, it's not blisteringly fast, but you wouldn't expect it to be, but it's nippy enough for sure. Brakes actually nice and responsive too. It's rattly, it's very rattly, and it's reasonably firm, bouncy ride too, despite the fact that it is on pretty tiny wheels. There is the tiniest amount of torque steer if you plant the car in first gear, but it is really only the tiniest amount. Visibility, as it always is in these older cars, is brilliant. Can see absolutely everything. Goldfish bowl is the term that comes to mind, but a very square goldfish bowl. And what's the turning circle like? Also excellent. And now the speedo works. Self-healing technology the French had clearly developed in the late 1980s. Means we can now tell how fast the car is. It's not that bad, actually. It was pretty good. What's really surprising me is just how much power this car has all the time. There's not a lot, but it is there pretty much always. It's a lot of fun, this thing. Oh, the front will tramp a little bit if you boot it in first. It's a lovely steer. You can place it perfectly. Never have I been able to see my front camera. Never ever in a video been able to see my forward camera. That's a hell of a thing to be able to do. And we're off. Yeah, about 2,500 RPM really, but that turbo comes in so smoothly. Not the sharpest of steering. There is a not a play, but there is a softness to it, probably because you've still got relatively, high-profile tyres on the side of it. As you build up the speed, the car does develop a level of compliance, which you'd nearly call a little bit of springiness or bounciness. It's very quintessentially French handling, but I've got to say that the little 5GT is really quite a wonder. It's lovely. Smooth, easy, nice to drive. You could have a lot of fun in this car, provided there wasn't anybody else, like for example a moron in an Audi TT Coupe trying to impress his small family that are in the back. But other than that, this is a car that you can have fun in, or you could just use as a kind of cool classic daily. They've got some fancy stuff like electric windows, very nice, and a digital clock, very fancy. Impress all your friends. It's simple, it's nice. Yeah, it might be old school, and somebody might have stabbed the dash with the windscreen wiper rather than put it on the side of the console where you'd expect it to be, but I like this car. Wasn't sure I would actually, but I do. Anyway, that's part 1 of my little series on French hot hatches. Hope you enjoy the rest of it. See you soon. Bye-bye.